Patty Simpson with Simpson Math. In this video, we're going to change fractions to percents and decimals. In a previous video, we looked to see that fractions, decimals, and percents are really just the same thing. They're part of a whole. It's just that decimals we write with a denominator of 10, hundreds, thousands, and percent is always out of 100, so the denominator is always equal to 100. So we're going to take a few fractions here and just write them as decimals and then percents. In order to write it as a decimal, we would like the denominator to be 10 or 100 or 1,000. So I'm just going to multiply this by a fancy 1. If I multiply it by 2 over 2, that's just 1, so it doesn't change my fraction any. And this is going to be an equivalent fraction. 4/10 is the same thing as 2/5. Now I chose 2 because 5 times 2 gives me that 10. When I get it up to tenths, then I can write it as a decimal. As a decimal, then it's 0.4, which is 4/10. This number is the same as that number, is the same as this number. All of those numbers are exactly the same. Then to write it as a percent, we would want it out of 100. So I could multiply the top and the bottom by 10 to make it 40 out of 100, or I could add a 0 here to the hundredths place. Either way, it becomes 40%. Here we're going to do the same thing, where I want to turn this into a decimal and a percent. Well, 4 doesn't go nicely into 10, so multiplying by a number to get to 10 is not going to work, but it does go into 100. So I can multiply this by 25 to get to 100. So 3/4 is equal to 75 out of 100. And if you think about it, 3/4 is equal to 75 cents out of $1. So these two numbers are exactly the same. Now that I have it with 100 in my denominator, I can write it as a decimal. It goes to the hundredths place. So 75 hundredths, this is tenths, hundredths. So I'm out to the hundredths place there as a decimal. And then as a percent, because it's out of 100, I just take that 100 and turn it into my percent sign. So it's 75%, or 75 out of 100. Let's do the same thing with 8/10. Oh, that one's nice because it already has tenths in the denominator. So I can just rewrite that as my decimal as 0.8 because this is the tenths place. Then if I want to make it as a percent, I can multiply the top and the bottom by 10 so that I end up with 80 out of 100 or 80%. Then the 20, well 20, I could divide it by 2 to get down to 10. If I divide this by 2, well that would give me, divide that by 2 and you get 1.5. So, but maybe that's not too pretty. Maybe instead of going down to 10, let's go up to 100. And again, to get to 100, I'm going to multiply by 5 so that I end up with 15 over 100. So in my tenths place is that 1, because 2 goes in there 1.5 times. Well, then the hundredths place then is 15. And then to write that as a percent, since it's out of 100, I just take that 100 and turn it into a percent sign. So we can take a fraction and then just make the denominator 10 or 100 or 1,000 to turn it into decimals and into percents. Another way to do it is just to simply divide. In other words, take the top and divide by the bottom. So in this case, if I wanted to use the division to help me find the percent or the decimal for 3/20, I could just take my 3, my numerator goes inside, and my denominator goes on the outside. And now I'm simply going to divide. Now 20 doesn't go into 3, so I add a decimal and a 0. Then I ask myself, how many times does 20 go into 30? The decimal goes straight above. 20 goes into 30 one time. Multiply, 1 times 20 is 20. So subtract, and you get 10. So I have that remainder, I'm going to keep going, add another 0, drop it down. So now 20 goes into 100 how many times? Well, 20 goes into 105 times. So 20 times 5 is 100. I subtract and I get 0. There's no remainder there. Notice that when I did this division, the top divided by the bottom, I also got 15 hundredths or 15%. So you can just simply divide to find out that decimal. Let's show one more where we just divide. Here I've got 3/4. I'll do the same thing where I just simply divide. If I take 3 and divide by 4, well, 4 doesn't go nicely into 3. So I'm going to put a decimal and add a 0. Well, 4 goes into 30 7 times. So this decimal here follows straight up, and it goes in there 7 times. Now I multiply. 7 times 4 is 28. Subtract, and we get 2. Add another 0 as long as I have a remainder there. 4 goes into 25 times. Multiply. 5 times 4 is 20. Subtract, and I don't have a remainder, so I'm finished. Notice I got the 75 hundredths just by dividing. So one way to determine a decimal is just to make your denominator tenths and hundredths, thousandths. And we want it out of 100 to make it into a percent, or we can simply make just divide the top divided by the bottom to find that decimal as well. Math Made Simple, it's Simpson Math. Thanks for watching.